It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson, the parenting expert on Channel 9's Parental Guidance and the host of the number one parenting podcast in the country, in Australia, the Happy Families Podcast. Kylie's not with me today. I wish she was, because my guest, as a repeat guest, a return offender, Associate Professor Jenet Erickson is a researcher in looking at the complementary roles of mums and dads in the way that children develop. Also a research fellow at the Institute for Family Studies in the United States. And after a fantastic conversation recently, Jenet joins me again. Thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. We had so much fun last time.
It's so great to be on, Justin. Thank you.
So last time we were talking about how COVID has affected work and family balance, and how many parents, the overwhelming majority, are saying we want to keep on working from home because we can have more time with the kids and it's just working out better for our families. Today I want to talk a little bit about the main area of your research, which is what you describe as the complementary roles that mothers and fathers play in the nurture and raising of their children. Can you just talk a bit about that? Because whenever I hear a conversation like this, I'm always nervous that somebody's going to end up saying, well, there's a reason for tradition and things need to be the way they've always been. And yet we've seen tremendous advancements that have led to better outcomes for kids and better outcomes for adults as well, as we've changed what our society's about. So how do mums and dads raise their kids differently? And why is this important that they have that involvement? And how do we balance that against the needs of an egalitarian society? That should be easy to answer in 5 minutes or less, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I love this topic. I feel like we just have this window into the remarkable complementarity of mothers and fathers. We know biologically we're different, right? We've got different hormones, we've got different brain structures, we've got different physiology going through us. And it really is fascinating to look at where it shows up. So just to start, there was an author who wrote this: men elicit tickling and tossing, women elicit cooing and cuddling. And what was being described is that oxytocin floods both mother and father in the process of giving birth. She's flooded with oxytocin, the bonding hormone. He also experiences increases in oxytocin and vasopressin. But what it elicits from her behaviorally is cooing and cuddling and communication with that baby and holding that baby close and looking in the eyes of that baby. And father's experiencing that flood, and he's responding with tickling and tossing. It's why all these women are like, what are you doing with that child? Throwing them up in the air, right? And what you'll see over and over again is there's something about men's experience of that bonding process that elicits a stimulating, an exciting, an openness to the outside world. And you see it carry through development. So the other thing you'll notice right away is that women tend to hold an infant close to their body. Men tend to hold an infant like a football. And no woman does that. And it's so interesting that when we look at how fathers impact development and how mothers impact development, you see kind of it revealed in the way they actually hold that baby. So she plays such a role in building core, that right brain development in attachment relationship and building sense of self, building a sense of well-being, core. And he is impacting how that child relates to the outside world. And so holding that baby, he's putting that baby to look at the world the way he's seeing the world. And so what we see show up is dads are really important for how children, it's why you'll see incarceration rates are higher for children who've grown up without a father, boys who've grown up without a father. You'll see academic achievement really impacted by fathers. In fact, in the US, college graduation, the number one predictor of that key predictor is presence of a father in a child's life and involvement of a father. And their way of relating to boundaries and the outside world is really shaped by dad, his presence, his involvement, his closeness. So it shows up again in, for example, how fathers impact the sexual trajectory. We'll call it the trajectory of a daughter's sexual development.
Well, hold up just a sec there, Jenna. Before we talk about that, I need to wind back a bit, because we've covered a whole lot of ground in about like 3 minutes. We've gone from the baby is born and the way mum holds the baby is like this, and dad does that, and now we're talking about jail and university graduation and all that kind of thing. I just want to pull it back and highlight a couple of things before we talk about sexual trajectories, as important as that is. The first is that you've made a comment that I know that some people are going to be affronted by, and that is that that there is such a thing as a blue brain or a pink brain. There's a message that's out there that babies are born as a blank slate and the environment shapes them. But there's plenty of evidence, and I think this needs to be underlined. It really needs to be emphasized that the actual structure of brains is different from birth.
Yes.
Babies are different based on the gender with which they're born, right? So different levels of corpus callosum connection and development there, different inter versus intra-hemispheric communication, all these different size of brains. So a baby's, a boy brain is a 6 to 10% bigger than a girl's brain. That doesn't make them smarter, by the way. Anyone who's watched boys and girls can attest that the size of your brain doesn't affect how intelligent you are. But I just want to emphasize that for people who are questioning and going, hang on, I've not heard that before. There's a library of books and loads of evidence that shows that. The other thing that I wanted to highlight was just a quick personal reflection. When you said mums and dads hold their babies differently, now, I know that as a dad, there's been plenty of times where I've held my precious babies up to my chest and my shoulder and just they've melted into me and I've thought, oh, this is amazing. But as soon as you said carrying them like a football, I almost laughed out loud because I'm thinking, I remember when I would pick up my babies and I've had 6 of them. So my wife and she's actually had them. I've just carried them. But I need to be careful about what I say here. You know what I mean? But as I'm holding my babies, I used to pick them up and I would either put their back to my belly, literally, so that I'd be carrying them along and I'd be bouncing them along so they're watching what I'm watching, exactly what you said. Or the football thing, I would lay them along my arm when they were little babies so that their head was in my hand and their body was stretched out so their backside was sort of up near my elbow. Yeah. And I would walk with them literally like a koala attached to my arm. I'd just carry them that way. My wife would never, she would get so cranky at me when I'd carry the babies like that. But to me, it was just that was naturally how I carried them.
Yeah.
Fascinating that you've pointed that out.
It is so fascinating, right? And I appreciated you talking about those brain differences, how interesting that is, and that it just shows up. So we even see an infant, right, even before they could hold a toy, a girl brain, there's more wiring in there for her to pay attention to the face of a human being.
Really?
And so you hold up a doll and that infant girl will spend more time looking at that face. An infant boy will spend more time looking at a truck or a car and the movement. And when we look at the way the brain is structured, we can see actually they are wired to pay attention to different things. And so, of course, right, fathers and mothers are impacting that development, and fathers and mothers carry that same biological reality in them, and they're influencing development. We mentioned, this, how you said, showing the baby what you're seeing in the outside world and this impact that fathers have on the way children relate, right? Whether it's achievement, whether it's risk-taking, fathers tend to promote risk-taking. You have Andrea Doucet out of Canada looking at stay-at-home dads, and she said, I'm watching these dads who are at home with their children, mother's at work, or there's divorce, and there's not a mother there. And the dad says it's time for lunch, and he says, go make your own sandwich. She's in a home with a mother, and the mother says, what kind of sandwich do you like? And she's over there making the sandwich. And she sees a dad, go put your own backpack on. You can tie your shoes, right? And at first she's thinking, these selfish dads, these like disconnected. And then she says, it was fascinating over time to realize nurturing is both holding close and letting go. Both are essential. And fathers seem, for whatever reasons, to be oriented towards facilitating that developmental process of becoming independent. And so they'll say, climb higher, get higher, get higher. She's there, come down, you're going to hurt yourself. And he's saying, I'll catch you. You'll watch him when they've got a mother, father behind the children taking a test, it's a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, and you'll watch how that child's trying to solve the math problem. They're struggling. The mother steps in and says, remember how to do this. And she's coaching them through it. And the dad is behind saying, you got this, you can do that. And you'll see it in all kinds of ways, this complementary nature to the way they parent that facilitates a well-rounded whole kind of developmental process that children depend upon. Dads tend not to intervene with discipline as frequently. Mothers will intervene and they'll correct, and they're much more flexible in how they carry out consequences. So she's negotiating, and dad doesn't negotiate. He'll say, I intervene. He will intervene less frequently, but when he does, the line holds. And you see children need both processes going on, or they benefit from both of those processes going on. And it just carries out across development. So you can see why, right, there will be this sense of that difference itself in in his size and structure and voice tone and face and composition as a male, and hers, and a child interfacing with both of those actually expands their capacity to work with difference, to identify their sameness. There's just a whole lot that happens in that complementary dynamic that, creating life and facilitating its development.
After the break, we're going to dive into how mothers and fathers work together to help their kids to make safe, healthy decisions around sex and morality, and a whole lot more on the Happy Families podcast. Imagine a relationship where you felt seen, heard, and valued. One where, as your partner enters the front door, they see you and their eyes light up. A relationship like that is a gift. If you don't have it now, you can. The Happy Families webinar, Better Together, gives you the insight, tools, and support you need to have a happier relationship. Available now at the Happy Families webshop. It's the Happy Families podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. This is Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm hanging out with Associate Professor Jenet Erickson from Brigham Young University, also a research fellow at the Institute for Family Studies in the United States, having this fascinating conversation about the complementary way that mums and dads influence the way that their kids are raised. Before the break, Jenet, you mentioned something about the sexual risk-taking and the sexual development of kids based on whether or not dads are present and how they're present versus mums. Do you think you could explore that a little bit with us?
Yes. So it's so fascinating, Justin, this and painful a little bit. You see, what we saw initially in repeated studies was that girls who grew up without fathers, their sexual trajectory, and researchers will even say it's almost as if the presence and closeness of a father sets the sexual trajectory of his daughters. Those girls were more likely to engage in unsafe sexual relationships earlier onset and not to demand, in a sense, the kind of treatment of a male who was both protective and romantically involved with her, as those girls who had fathers who were both close to them and present. And the data is really interesting because they were looking at daughters whose parents divorced. And you could look at sisters. So one girl would be 3 years old when the parents got divorced. Another would be 9 years old. And just looking at how that shaped the length of time they had a father present, how it shaped or predicted when they engaged sexually and the quality of the sexual relationships that they had. And what came out is dads really, really are important for daughters. It's as if he communicates to her what protective love that is not sexually interested in looks like, how it feels, how it should be. And it sets her expectation. And a host of other things are going on psychologically that way. Now, for boys, I think we've highlighted how fathers impact girls, but for boys, right, there's a recognition that fathers will shape how boys relate to women sexually and children. And so the presence of a father who is protective and loving and shows that kind of attentive care in non-sexual, non-selfish ways, in a sense, that boys are shaped by that. And they grow up with increased capacity to develop healthy relationships in terms of how they relate to women and children as well. So dads, in that data, dads really are important. And especially in girls' way of relating to men, to male love, to male sexual interest.
What about when dad is present, but girls are still perhaps more inclined to make decisions that are unsafe or unhealthy, and boys as well, right? I mean, the presence of a father doesn't guarantee these things, nor does the absence of a father ensure that they will happen. There's a lot of variability, correct?
Yes, of course, because we're all human beings, right? Acting for ourselves. And yeah, it's so interesting that when that data came out, it wasn't just his being present, though it's interesting that father's presence, it's like his sheer presence in a home communicates a sense that I'm monitoring your behavior and protecting. He's at the door when the guy comes to pick up his daughter, and just his presence signals, I'm watching over this child, and someone is watching over and protecting this child.
You're not talking about that horrible stereotype from the 1970s, 1980s where dad's standing there with a gun or a baseball bat saying, I'm here to You're not talking about a protector in that sort of, my name is Arnold, and it's not, I'm here to protect. It's rather just the fact that they're there sends an unspoken message There's no threat. You're not talking about that sort of explicit form of protection. You're just saying the fact that they're there, right, it does something different, right?
Right. Yeah. Their presence, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like asking questions. It's interesting how fathers monitoring is very important. And monitoring is just simply saying, who were you with last night? And when are you going to be home? And it's not a threatening kind of thing. It's just saying, I care about you. I care about who you've been with. And I'm communicating that to the child by the questions I'm asking and my way of being present. But I'm also communicating it to outsiders that I care and I'm watching over and I'm present. And that really matters. It's a very powerful influence.
So, Jenet, I mean, such a fascinating conversation. We could keep this going for ages. I've actually got a book on my bookshelf called Gender and Parenthood by Brad Wilcox, who you mentioned earlier. Fascinating, looking at the way animals and humans are consistent in all the things that you're describing, the way that complementary role. But ultimately, there's a lot of single mums and single dads who are listening. There's probably some same-sex couples who are listening. There's a whole lot of different families that are structured in all kinds of different ways who want to get the dynamic right and maybe or maybe not have the capacity to get that complementarity working. If there was one overarching take-home message when it comes to our children, their well-being, our family's happiness, when you look at all of the research across societies, not just America or not just Australia, but right around the world, what would the most important thing you think be for any parent listening to this conversation to hear?
Yeah, wow. That's a fantastic question, Justin. I was so stunned, like maybe everybody, seeing the Harvard grant study, the 75-year longitudinal study, never done before, taking the same group of students from Harvard's 1936 class, tracking them for 75 years, looking at every part of their lives. And it ends, and Grant Vallant says, the take-home message is love is happiness, full stop. And then he just dives into how powerful warm and nurturing relationships in childhood are and how that pattern is carried across development. That what really matters in all the dimensions of our well-being is the quality of our relationships, the quality of our connections, beginning with those most core relationships. And so I think about single mothers and single fathers. I marvel at how they find ways to connect with children. That powerful statement from Bill Doherty, the great marriage family therapist, where he says, the intentional family is a ritualizing family. And that you find ways, ritualizing, meaning ways to connect with each other on a daily basis, whether it's hugs and kisses at night, or it's right how you say goodbye, or how you say hello, or doing family dinner, but there is a time when we know this is the most important thing to us, is connecting together. And it could be brief, but it's so important that we want to protect it. And so you see a single mom, she's able to navigate the transition through divorce or whatever else with rituals of connection that confirm that the most important thing in this world is our connection to each other, that closeness that we have with one another. And married parents trying to do the same thing, right? In a world that would pull us apart, it's finding ways to really ensure that those connections happen on a daily basis so that we have that priority of relationships. We just say nothing else really in the end matters more than this working together, loving each other, caring for each other, being there for each other.
Oh, what a great take-home message. Associate Professor Jenet Erickson from Brigham Young University, thank you again for your wisdom on the Happy Families podcast.
Thank you, Justin. Loved being on.
As always, we appreciate Justin Rulon from Bridge Media and Craig Bruce putting together the podcast and making it sound fabulous. If you'd like more info about making your family happier, please visit happyfamilies.com.au.